Okay, happy snow day, you guys. I know it's class is Friday, but it's kind of nice to have a little break in the week. Perfect day for sketching. I just want to roll over some of, again, like our key takeaways from drawing flat illustrations. So right now I'm just placing my croquis underneath just a piece of my Bristol paper here. So I've got this croquis here. I know in class we talked about 9 head croquis. This here is an 8 head. So it's very proportional to the actual average body. And that is because we want our flat sketches to be more realistic in size and proportion than we do our actual croquis illustrations. So I'll refer to this as a tech flat, more of a sketch than an illustration. So anyway, I've placed this under here to just be able to see my actual croquis through my paper here. And it is a-okay to use tracing paper. I personally don't like to use tracing paper just because, let's say this is something I want to showcase in my portfolio. I don't want to have the actual tracing paper have any grin through to the backside of whatever paper I'm using as a platform for my portfolio page. And that is personal preference, and everyone is allowed their own. But anyway, for this demo, hopefully you guys can see through this and you can see the croquis. I've positioned this straight with the page here. Definitely feel free to use tape if you need to like keep it in place, or even want to pull your paper loose leaf and work flat on a table. So I've got this in place here. There's a front and a back body. And I start every flat sketch I do, I start it in the center. Let's see. Okay, so I've got my number 2 pencil here. So I'm gonna start with my see-through ruler. I'm just going to trace off that center line that runs down the body. So there is the anchor point to our entire illustration. There are a couple ways to draw these, I know I've mentioned. So this here, I'm going to keep both sides in this case, the illustration I'm gonna do is gonna be symmetrical. But that doesn't mean that you don't have freedom to make this more of a float style, meaning that maybe it's like unbuttoned from left to right, and you wanna like show off the collar laying a little bit different from one side or the other. Same goes for sleeves. I'll peel this back for a moment. Maybe you want one sleeve to hang straight. And this croquis that you guys are getting in class is great too, because you can draw a straight sleeve, or you can draw one that's a little more extended outward, or you can have one that has this bend in the elbow like this. So it's great to have options, and you can, again, choose a straight sleeve on the wearer's right and then do a bent sleeve on the left. And that's kind of the beauty of art, is it's up to you. So I've got this centered. I always like to work top down, and you can see if this works for you, and maybe you can adapt your style and find a different way of working, but I like to start at my neckline because everything, in my opinion, kind of moves from there. So this has a jewel neckline outlined. But let's say we want to work with a collar. So collars usually sit up and around the neck. So it's so easy to look at this and think that if you're going to draw a collar, that you want it to sit kind of equal to the shoulder and down here at the collarbone. But it's actually going to be up and around the neck. So I've got just a faint outline of that jewel neckline. So this is just kind of where the actual neck on a body would be, the upper collarbone here. And let's say I have a collar, it's just gonna be a collared shirt. So every collared shirt will have, this is gonna be the folded edge that wraps all the way around, and then you'll have your long edge here, and then you've gotta create that collar point. So that's 3 lines total, and put a little curve to it, because it has a fold to it. So we'll have a wrap around, and let's say this has a collar stand. So a collar stand is something that the collar is going to be sewn into. And that's not always the case. You don't have to have a collar stand, but it definitely makes a more formal shirt. So then, give that a little shape. For the shoulder, we want the collar to sit above the actual shoulder line. So there's going to be a bump here, almost like a stair step. So we'll come down and give that a stair step, shoulder to collar. Trying to think if there's anything else that I need to over explain here, but hopefully you guys get the gist. So now we'll move on to armhole. And armhole is very important, and we'll talk about this more when we get to croquis. So you definitely always want to note the armhole. And again, this croquis is very nice because it has that armhole shape for you here. So it's a very easy way to define your shoulder to armhole. And then down to sleeve. And I like to give just a very, very minimal rounded edge to my sleeve opening. I just think it looks a little softer than just a stark straight line. Now you can see the waist dips in, but that does not mean that you have to keep this garment fitted to the body, because the hip here shapes out, but that doesn't mean that you have to keep that shape exactly. So you have to think about what the actual fit is of the garment that you want to be creating. So we've got waistline here. So this is right where that bend is in your waist. Think about your navel. And then we've got, let's see, I think this is going to be kind of high hip, whereas low hip is like the widest part of the tush, about here. And then you've got crotch point. So let's say we want maybe our button up to hit it high hip. We know that we want it to be able to tuck in. And we don't want to nip it in at the waist, because that means that we're going to have to then think about like what darts we want to do to make that fit. So we want it to, maybe it has a shaped waist, but it is not super uncomfortable and just tight to the body. And so funny with flats, it's kind of helpful if you just kind of look at the human body. It always feels weird to draw a sleeve length longer than the body, but if you look at how your arms hang, you'll see that they really do, kind of like the old-fashioned test, like, is your skirt too short? Like, where do your hands sit? So it's just kind of neat to relate the human anatomy back to your tech sketch. So we have our center front here already established, but it's so easy to think that your actual like placket edge will be center front. It's actually not. It's going to be offset by a bit. So we know though that our buttons will be at center front. So we have our collar stand, so we'll have a button for the collar stand, and then evenly spaced down. And usually you stop them about 3.5 to 5 inches above the bottom opening, so you won't go all the way down. Typically on body, this would be, you usually want like 2.5 inch to 3 inch spacing between each button. So think about relatively like how long your pattern may be when you're truly deciding buttons for a technical piece here. Okay, so now we're going to create our placket extension. So it's just gonna come slightly past the center front for an overlap. And this collar band here will do the same, because you want those edges to meet up. So now the big thing you have to ask yourself, and I'm just gonna like make this a little bit extreme here so that it's a topic of conversation. Do we want a fold over placket extension, or do you want it to be set on? So if we want it set on, it needs to be a separate piece entirely. So then we're gonna need one more solid line on the other side of these buttons. So now that we have that done, then we can reverse it to the other side. So we'll wrap this collar around again and keep it simple. It's really, you gotta think about this line by line. So don't, so just try to break it down if it starts to get a little confusing in your head. Okay, shoulder, do the armhole, the outer edge of the sleeve, undersleeve, and then to our sleeve hem. We don't want this to nip in at the waist too much, and then we'll come down to the bottom opening here. Okay, so it looks pretty good. I'm gonna pull this croquis out just so you can see it without anything behind it, because now you can see that this back is here is not finished. So we do want to finish the top of our collar. So this is the back side on the back neck, and you have the option here to create kind of like a little C fold for that collar shape to the front neck, knowing that this is a roll line created here between the back and front. So there's nothing to connect, no line to connect front to back. It's almost just implying this fold. Okay. Let's say, so this is maybe more of a rigid sketch, and let's say maybe I want a drop tail. So I'm going to just create a separate hemline here that maybe hangs a little longer than the front. And I'm going to stick a vent on here, which means that I will add stitching. And that looks pretty good. Now for most button-ups, you're going to have a cuff. So I am going to come and revisit my sleeve just to shape this up. So let's add a cuff here. And it looks pretty simple from the front. And this is why a back drawing is also always helpful, because there's so many different ways to do a cuff and a placket opening. So it's just really paying a lot of attention and close detail to everything that needs to go into this flat sketch. For this example, just so that I can wrap up all my points, I do want to talk about my micron pens here that come in a variety of sizes, just like a lot of other things we've been using. So I have a number 8, which is what I like for my outline. So your outline is always going to be your thickest line. What's scary about the outline is this is definitely a permanent marker. So you can see here I got a little off course. My pen went a little wild on its own. And it's fine if you want to take rulers to maybe trace some of these off, but I try not to be so hard on myself to have such a rigid line. So I mean, this is going to be, it's fine. It's also why I do all my sketches on the computer these days, so then I can bleed perfection. Okay. Okay, so now our outlines are done with the heavy set marker. So now we're going to work our way down. It's just like counting down a rocket ship. So we know that heavy set, our number 8, the biggest number, outline, and then we're going to work our way down. Here I have an 05, and then I have a 0.4, an 01, and then a 005, so teeny tiny, which is great for stitches. So I will use my 05 on all of my other internal seams, so my armhole placket I am definitely going to use a ruler on to get this straight and narrow. And I am choosing a set in placket because they look fabulous. Okay, buttons are hard to detail on text sketches, can be done, but I'm just going to do circles right now. And then you definitely want to call out, because you have to think this text sketch is really a universal language. So if this were to be sent off to a factory or even just a friend for sewing, you want to let them know what direction your buttonholes are in. So your top buttonhole, if you have this stand, will always be horizontal. So I'm just going to do a little teeny tiny line that runs horizontal, and the rest that run the length of the placket will be vertical. It'll be centered. So I'm just going to, kind of looks like Saturn really, little rings on Saturn. Draw these straight little lines coming out of the circle. And it's just a good reminder of what process you're going to be doing once you get to that stage. Okay, so I'm going to now switch down to an even smaller marker so I can do all my stitch lines. And at this point too, if you feel like it's looking a little messy, you can go ahead and erase some of your pencil lines, because you do want to go back and clean this up once it's permanent. Yeah, it looks so much better. And you can spend more time on that. Okay, so now, let's see. So you could either use a 0, 1, so a 1 or a 005. This one's like a very tiny little marker. And now we need to think about what will actually have stitches applied to it. So all your solid lines, those are your seams. So you have to think about each solid line forms a seam that is sewn. So this tells you your sleeve is separate from your body. So you know you're going to cut that flat, but it will have to be sewn into the body. Your shoulder seam has to get sewn. Like these are all either edges or seams. But now we need to go in and touch with our marker what will have stitches that will actually be seen on the exterior of the garment. So I have a set on placket, which means, crazy you guys, we're going to add stitching inside of these solid lines and on the placket itself. And that's the other thing too, like you've got to get your brain thinking about this. Like if you have a placket set on, like how does it get set on? Because if I were to sew my stitches on the body, well then guess what? My placket is possibly not even going to be attached. So you just have to slow down and think about it, especially before it's permanent. Really big dashed lines, but there they exist. And then let's say I want a top stitch along my collar edge. Now mind you, this roll line here, this is what's on your actual neck. So this cradles your neck. You will not want any stitching there because there's no way it'll exist. It's a fold line. But let's say you want a top stitch around the point and the bottom edge here. And that looks amazing. And then let's say we want a set-in sleeve. So set-in means that there will not be stitching on the sleeve, so it will be on your armhole instead. So I'm just going to set that sleeve in here. And really that's telling you the direction of your seam allowance inside. So let's say I wanted to do a set on sleeve. So if I'm going to do set on, the stitching is on. So set on sleeve means my stitching would be on the actual sleeve itself. This is not done often. The only time that I ever really do a set on sleeve is, let's say I want to control that seam allowance, like I said, to be in the actual sleeve itself, which is kind of nice because it gives you a little more volume in the sleeve. So that's something you have to, again, know in advance, because if this is a set-in sleeve, so you can kind of see my shoulder comes out and then the sleeve is just right under the shoulder. But now if I have a set-on sleeve, that sleeve would actually kind of poof out a bit further to then come down. Because adding that seam allowance there is just, it's enough bulk and added fullness that it can really control the look of your sleeve. Same with waistlines on skirts and dresses. You can control the way that the fullness can lie based on the seam allowance alone, based on this teeny tiny little dashed line, which is your stitch. Okay, so like I said, we need to now finish what we have vented here in order to have this stair step hem. So we do need a vent, which will appear on the outside as only a dashed line. So it's kind of over and down. But then we need to also note that that vent will be sewn on the back side. So in order to get that on the back side, you need a solid line with your stitch line falling inside of that solid line, because the material to finish that is going to have to be rolled in to then even get the opportunity to be sewn. So kind of like that. Okay, let's apply a hemline here. Super nice, this is a woven, so this will only have single needle stitching, or I mean you can do double needle, but you don't have to. It's done on knit so that you can use different machines. Okay, and then same as the vent, we need a solid line because you're turning up that fabric, so you're creating an edge that will then get sewn down. And then this stitch line here that I'm creating talks to the front, so it's like, it's just the internal view versus the external view. So just something to think about. Okay, now I'm going to do our cuff, and I want a set on cuff. So I'm going to have my stitching here, and maybe I want, not necessary, but maybe I want a decorative top stitching at my edge. Cool, looks pretty good. I feel like it needs a pocket, but actually I'll add a pocket really quick because after our first lesson, I did see that some people were adding their stitches on the outside of the pocket. But again, you really have to think of this in terms of sewing. Like you can't lay that cut pocket piece on your shirt and sew around it and expect it to actually stay put. It's just not going to. Like you are making that pocket to sew it on. You are setting it on. So that stitch line now needs to follow the perimeter here, minus the opening. And then you can decide your actual hem, your pocket hem. So I don't want it to be as close to the edge as maybe the stitch I'm using to set it on. So maybe I want like a 1-inch hem, so that'll be a little lower. And then that will give you a button-up shirt. So this is a rigid sketch, but I will quickly in the same demo, I swear I'll keep it quick. I'm gonna do a more soft sketch really quickly. So I'm just gonna line this up with my line that's already existing for center front. Okay, let's say I'm gonna create something probably really wild in design, but just to like show multiple points at once. Let's say I want a cowl neck. So in order to get a cowl, you want it to be on the bias, so it's gonna like kind of fold in on itself. So you can kind of give yourself maybe a lower neckline. Let's say we want a lower neckline here. And when I'm drawing this cowl, and give me an armhole, there we go, so I've got that noted. You want your lines not necessarily to connect, they'll kind of like, I don't know, like kind of fish hook, like that. But in the drape and in the shape of the neckline. So let's say this part of the drape will fall behind this part of the drape. They do not have to connect because right now we are focusing on the folds of our fabric. And then for your actual shoulder, most cowls are set in with gathers at the shoulder. So we want this to have some bumps to it. And the way I like to draw my bumps, especially for this type of thing, is like ocean waves. Obviously a lot more micro than this, but just to give you an idea of like what I'm putting down on paper. Okay, so we've got our cowl. And now let's say, what else do I want to do? I'm going to come down. I'm going to keep this fitted to the waist here because I'm going to add shearing. So for that shearing, let's say we want it to be not quite empire, but just a bit under the bust to the natural waistline. So for shearing, kind of these ocean waves, you're going to want down the actual side seams itself. So you'll have a straight side seam until this band that'll be sheared. And it can be messy. It does not have to be perfect left to right or even up and down, because in all honesty, the way that the garment will be produced, it will have, like not every fold is going to lay perfectly, especially when shearing is involved. Like, this is not a pleat, it is a method. Let's say in this case, I want stitches across here to create that shearing. There's so many different ways to do this, but I'm going to create my stitches across. Now I'm going to fill in. So you're going to want to create almost like little, again, fish hooks, like up, down, and we're going to have them coming from every stitch, and then again from top and bottom here. So even these top and bottom lines here, you can create somewhat of your ocean waves, and then go in and fill this in with like teeny tiny mini fish hooks, like up and down, and try not to overthink it, though I always overthink this stuff. Okay, but just to get our point across. All right, now let's say we want, I don't want a leg of mutton. I think I'm gonna do more of like a bell sleeve, but I'm gonna put a cuff with it, so it's gonna get cinched up at the bottom opening here. So let's say we want a small little cuff here. Maybe I wanted elastic. So if I wanted elastic, I'm gonna create small ocean waves top and bottom. Okay, and then I'm gonna start from my shoulder here, come down, bell it out to then like kind of let it balloon back in. And you can tell I'm holding my pencil up a little higher because it allows me a little more freedom to get drafty with this rather than being so rigid. So I'm just trying to relax. And I'm working with my pencil right now, which is nice because I can then perfect which lines I want to keep in my pen. Actually, maybe we want to do this as a bent arm. So kind of like what we did on the collar up top, this is going to have this like little C hook here rather than a line that connects the two. Okay, it's going to be kind of difficult. Here's our little elastic band, because we still want to keep what's considered that drape. It's a lot easier to kind of show that off when the sleeve is hanging straight. But since I like to be difficult, we're just going to give this an option. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to finish my back neckline. So that is high point shoulder to high point shoulder, which are these points here. So I'm just going to connect that. And this is a cowl, and with my cowls I create a fold over facing in the front here that you won't see, but it exists back here. So I'm actually going to go ahead, and I know that fold over facing is going to be, let's say, 2 inches in from this neckline. So it'll be at the back too. So I'm going to do like a 2-inch facing back here, separate from the cowl. So this is kind of hard to maybe understand, but on your tech sketch, you can always go in and shade this part here, just so you know that's the internal tech backside of your fabric. Okay, now let's think of another way to throw something into the mix, and I may do this a couple different ways, but first I want to show, like, let's say we have a really full skirt. So there's a couple different ways to do a hem. Like, I always kind of like to draft out first, like maybe you just want to like give yourself like a line to follow and keep that a straight line. But if you have a lot of fullness and you can kind of grasp that from this A line here, you have to note how that fabric's going to fall. So you can either do that with some ocean waves, and hopefully you can, maybe I'll try drawing with my left hand really quick so you can definitely see. So we want to maybe take some lines straight up from the peak of this wave. But then you've got this back side of the fabric that doesn't quite exist yet, and you may not understand how the fabric is laying. So now from these lower parts here that swing left, we want to then take these up so that you can see that that back side of the fabric is laying under there. Like, it does exist even if you don't see it. So that is one option. Let's see, if you had pleats, you'd maybe want to use more of a zigzag to note those pleats with your lines coming up from the peak of that zigzag, and then maybe a softer line leading in, so that's your inner fold of those pleats. So option for pleats. And then if you wanted to balance this, if you're like, gosh, my ocean waves are only going in one direction, so you could split it. Maybe on the other side, your ocean waves could go, so not gonna feel natural, but in the other direction, totally fine too. And then the other way to draft this, and I'm gonna demo it here, is more like a puzzle piece. So let's say, we know we've got fullness coming from the waist, but this is gonna be a circle skirt, maybe, I don't know, attached to shearing. So you would have still some like gathers that'll continue onto the skirt from the shearing alone. But back to the hem. Let's say we want a puzzle piece here. I'm gonna try to make this symmetrical, but I still wanna keep the look overall organic. So I'm gonna bring this down, kind of give it a little curve to it and attach these two. And then we'll go up, because we're trying to do the folds here, to then come back down. And maybe create an upward here, maybe one more down motion. So it's, yikes, that went a little too wide. That looks definitely unnatural, but I just wanted you guys to see. I'll do maybe smaller puzzle pieces over here. So a down curve attached to the folds in the dress, and then your up curve. So really what it would look like, I'm gonna try to break it down by line, because that's really what you need to think of when you are drawing these, is line by line. So if we have this puzzle piece, it's going to curve down, curve up, come back down, back up, down and up, like this. And perhaps this needs to take on a little bit of a curve here. I just want you to see the breakdown of the line. And by puzzle piece, I just mean like these little nubs here that kind of go inward. And then same as the ocean waves, like we're gonna show here our folds in the fabric. And then you've got to show what's up and underneath here. So we do need to come back in. And this here is folding inward, but maybe like here, you know that you're gonna see like a little bit of fabric from the outer fold of your puzzle piece that needs to come in. And again, we'll just kind of give that a little bit of a shade. Kind of like what I've done here, just to note that it is not necessarily what's seen on the outside here. It is just to give like a shadow to show you the real depth of the folds of fabric. So a little bit softer to look at than your rigid sketch, but still just as beautiful, mostly because of these like finite details that go into it. So again, you would outline the very outermost portion of the sketch in your heavy marker, and then start to fill in from there, knowing that every solid line is a seam that will be sewn, and every stitch really needs to be accounted for and thought out in the process of sewing as to know how it will be applied. But hopefully this helps with the flat sketch. These are definitely, in my opinion, like the most universal sketches. They don't seem as exciting because they are black and white, but I swear once you get into them, you won't stop, because you're here for a reason.